Jake Morrison was tending his new piece of land. Well, calling it land at this point was being charitable. It was a bare patch of dry ground that had been baked hard under the sun. But with enough care and water, it would produce crops. On a rise, there appeared a group of young Wolfgar, the local inhabitants of this planet. Think wolves, standing on two legs with hands, and you were pretty much there. He leaned on his hoe, actually a little happy for a distraction from the hard work for a short while. The leader shouted, "Go home, human. This is our land." Jake stiffened. This was not going to end well. "No, it isn't, boy. I purchased it from your elders just last week. Paid a good price. And we shook on it. The elders are wrong. Our land is not for sale." Jake was a military veteran. He had seen this kind of posturing too many times already in his life. He had also learned that it would have to be a fight to the death, because to do anything less is to disrespect the pack and bring them all down on you. He sighed. He had hoped to leave all of this behind. The leader marched forward. "I will feed your blood to the land." Jake let the hoe fall and bent to take out his knife out from his boot, which he also dropped. This was going to be hand-to-hand to keep it honorable, as if anything in violence was honorable. He breathed and centered himself. Then the young Wolfgar leapt at him, claws outstretched. Jake dropped to one knee, avoiding the claws, and caught him with a precise jab to the nerve cluster under the shoulder joint. The Wolfgar was knocked off trajectory and landed in a heap. Jake hated himself for having to do this, but he walked over, knelt over him, and gave him one punch in the throat. The Wolfgar gasped for air and died whilst Jake cradled his head. The others walked up to me and at 6 feet's distance bowed their head. I stepped out of their way and they picked up the body of their comrade and left in silence. Jake decided to call it a day. Hours later, as night was coming, Jake was at home when he saw a lone figure of Wolfgar striding towards his simple home. Oh no! Now what? Another challenge. He stepped out onto the porch. It was a female. She was graceful and dangerous. "Can I help you? You killed my mate. So now you are my mate." "That is the law, sorry." "What?" "You killed my mate. So you now must take his place and be my mate." "It is the law. You don't look happy about it. It is the law." "I will obey." "Well, it's not my law. Go home, little girl. This is my home now, okay? Stay there then. See if I care." She sat on the ground and Jake went into the house. Give it an hour or two and she will give up and go home. Later, he went to bed. The next morning, he got up, ate breakfast and got ready for another day of chores. He stepped out and she was still there, still sitting in a meditative state. "What the hell are you doing?" She opened her eyes. "You told me to stay here. So, because you are my mate, I stay here. I am not your mate. It is the law, not my law. It is the law." "Fine. Stay there." Then he gave up and went out to work on the land. At the end of the day, he returned and she was still there. He ignored her and went inside. Then he looked at her. She had been out there all day in the heat. He relented and took a canteen of water out to her. He handed it out. Here she looked at it confused. He sighed, took a sip and handed it back out. "It's water." "Ah," she said, "a mating ritual cup." "We share water," she said with dry lips, and then drank until the canteen was empty. He held out his hand. She gave him the canteen. "Thank you, mate," she said. "I am not your mate," he said, and turned to go back to the house. "Yet you care for me like a mate." He ignored and kept walking. Later, during the night, it started to rain. One of those really serious downpours. He smiled. That will move her. After 10 minutes, he thought he would check. And there she was, still sitting in the rain, soaking wet and starting to shiver from the cold. "Why don't you return to your pack?" he asked. "Because if I do, I am a rejected mate and I must die. It is the law. I get it. So, you are just going to sit there and die anyway?" She shrugged. "If that is the will of my mate." He exhaled. "Fine. Come inside and get dried out." He turned and went inside. She followed. The interior of the cabin was cramped, smelling of dried timber and gun oil. Jake didn't look back as he tossed a rough wool blanket onto the floor near the wood-burning stove. "Dry off. Don't touch anything," he grunted, heading to the small kitchenette to pump water into a kettle. The Wolfgar female, He realized he didn't even know her name, stood just inside the door. Water sluiced off her grey mottled fur, pooling on his floorboards. She didn't move toward the blanket. She watched his back with eyes that caught the dim lamplight, glowing a faint, haunting amber. "What's your name?" Jake asked, his back still turned. "Kaelia," she rasped. Her voice was deeper than a human woman's, carrying a slight vibrato from her throat. "Of the Red Cliff Pack." "Well, Kaelia, in this house, the law says you don't stand there shivering like a drowned rat. Use the blanket." She moved then, not with the heavy tread of a beast, but with a silent, predatory grace that made the hair on Jake's neck stand up. She didn't wrap the blanket around her shoulders. She laid it flat on the floor and sat cross-legged on it, staring at the fire he was stoking. Jake brought over a tin mug of hot broth. He held it out, and for a moment, their fingers brushed. Her skin was hot, feverishly so. Wolfgar metabolism ran higher than human, he remembered from the briefing files. "I am sorry I had to kill your mate, Kaelia. It was an honorable fight. And you killed him with 2 punches. Very impressive." Kaelia took a sip, her black nose twitching at the steam. "A challenge is a challenge." Track was young, boastful. He sought to prove the elders weak. "You proved him redundant." She looked up at Jake, her expression unreadable behind the canine muzzle. "In our way, strength is the only currency that doesn't devalue. You took his life, you took his debt to me." "I don't want your debt," Jake snapped, more harshly than he intended. "I wanted a quiet farm. I wanted to grow something that didn't involve a body count. Then you chose the wrong planet, human." The rain lashed against the corrugated metal roof, a rhythmic drumming that usually helped Jake sleep. Tonight, it felt like a countdown. He looked at this creature, part hunter, part widow, entirely alien, and realized the elders hadn't just sold him land. They had sold him a permanent spot in their ecosystem. "I'm going to sleep," Jake said, pointing to the bed in the corner. "You stay on the blanket." Kaelia laid down, curling her tail around her nose, her amber eyes never leaving him. "Understood, mate." "Jake," he corrected firmly. "The name is Jake." "Sleep well, Jake." The next morning, Jake got up and noticed that the now wet blanket was on the floor, but there was no sign of Kaelia. Jake shrugged. She must have got bored and finally gone away. So, he continued his morning routine, preparing a simple but hearty breakfast of porridge. Halfway through, Kaelia walked through the door triumphantly holding a gorafumph, their planet's version of a ground squirrel and an absolute pain to every farmer here. "Good morning, mate Jake. I have brought real food to build you up." She ripped it into 2, placing half on the plate Jake had laid out and greedily chewed into the other half. "Well, thank you, Kaelia." He picked up the plate and put it into the fridge. "I shall skin it and cook it later. You are a mystery to me, mate Jake. You are small and weak-looking with no claws or teeth to mention. Yet you bested my mate in fair combat with 2 contacts, ensuring that his soul will be worthy to join the great hunt in the afterlife. You eat meat, but you cook it first." He sat down with his porridge. "Yes. All of us humans are walking contradictions. I suppose in that way, we are a true reflection of life." In between tearing into the flesh, she said, "That sounds like something the elders would say. Are you a wise man, mate Jake?" He exhaled fully. "No. A wise man would have picked a better occupation than being a soldier. You are a warrior." "I was. Yet you hate combat." "It needed to be done. Or so I thought." She nodded and fell silent. Jake pushed a spoonful of porridge around his bowl, watching Kaelia as she finished her half of the kill with efficient, bone-crunching bites. She didn't use a chair. She crouched on her haunches, her tail twitching with a rhythmic contentment that felt unnervingly domestic. "The great hunt. He?" Jake muttered. "I didn't mean to send him there so fast. I just wanted him to move." Kaelia paused, a smear of dark blood on her muzzle. She tilted her head, her ears swiveling toward him. "To move is to survive. To stop is to die." Track stopped because your hand was swifter than his eye. "There is no shame in being bested by a superior predator. Only shame in running away. That is a harsh worldview, Kaelia." It is a harsh world, Mate Jake. After breakfast, and after Jake firmly explained that Mate Jake did not want the other half of the Gorafumf raw for dessert, they headed out to the field. The rain from the night before had softened the top inch of the crust, but beneath that, the ground remained as stubborn as an old mule. Jake picked up his hoe. He felt Kaelia's eyes on him, intense and analytical. "You scratch at the skin of the world," she said, her voice vibrating with a low, guttural humor. "Why? The earth does not want to give you its fruit. You must force it. It's called farming, Kaelia. It's how we stay in one place without having to chase squirrels all day. And yet, you look tired. Your heart beats too fast for such a slow task." She walked to the center of the tilled patch and dug her long, obsidian-black claws into the mud. She moved down the row like a living plow, her powerful leg muscles bunching and releasing. In 10 minutes, she had done what would have taken him 4 hours. But then she stopped, tired and panting. "How do you do it, Mate Jake? I am exhausted already." "My kind are persistence predators. We may be slow, but we never stop." "And why do you break the soil?" "To open it for the rain. This land is dry because the rain just flows off. But it can be contained. Then the land will grow things. You are giving the land a canteen." He nodded. "Yes, I suppose I am." Jake didn't stop. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a bleached sheet of white gold. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and his muscles burned with the familiar, grinding ache of manual labor. Every strike of the hoe was a rhythmic thud against the stubborn crust of the planet. Kaelia sat on a nearby rock, her tail flicking with a mixture of fascination and confusion. "Farming isn't just about breaking the ground, Kaelia," he'd explained, wiping grit from his brow. "It's about preparing it. If you just rip it up, you ruin the layers. It's a slow conversation between me and the dirt." She found the idea absurd. To a Wolfgar, if you wanted something, you took it with a burst of violence. To sit and converse with dirt for 6 hours seemed like a form of madness. Around midday, Jake noticed movement on the perimeter. It wasn't a war party. It was a dozen young Wolfgar, including a few pups who couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. They sat in a semicircle on the rise, watching him with rapt attention. "They think you are performing a ritual," Kaelia said, her ears perked forward. "Word has spread. The human who killed Track with 2 touches is now wrestling the Great Mother. They want to see who wins." One of the youngsters, a scrawny male with patchy fur, crept a bit closer. He pointed at the hoe. "Why does the great warrior use a claw on a stick? Are his own hands broken?" Jake stopped, leaning on the handle. He looked at the group of golden-eyed observers. "My hands aren't broken, kid. But the earth is stronger than me. If I fight it with my bare hands, I lose. If I use the tool, we reach an agreement." The pups whispered among themselves. To them, Jake wasn't a farmer. He was a gladiator in a marathon match against the planet itself. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Jake finally reached the end of the first plot. He was covered in gray dust, his hands were blistered, and he looked like he was ready to collapse. Kaelia stood up from her rock. She walked over to the freshly turned soil, sniffing it. She looked at the long, straight rows, perfectly symmetrical, meticulously prepared. She then looked at Jake, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes and the steady, unwavering set of his jaw. "You have a strange kind of fire, Jake," she said softly, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edge. Track had the fire of a brush fire, hot, fast, and easily put out. You are like the deep heat of the planet's core. It does not go out. It just persists." She turned to the audience on the hill and let out a short, sharp bark of dismissal. The youngsters scampered off, chattering excitedly about the humans' long battle. "You have earned their curiosity," Kaelia said, turning back to him. "And you have earned my silence for the evening. Come, the sun is setting. Even a warrior who fights the dirt must eat." Back inside, the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't mate and captor anymore. It was becoming something more akin to 2 soldiers in a foxhole. Jake set about skinning the Gorafumf she had caught earlier. "You said you were a veteran," Kaelia said, watching his practiced movements with the knife. Which war? Too many, Jake replied. That's why I bought this rock. I thought if I went somewhere where nothing lived, I wouldn't have to watch anything die. And yet, Kaelia gestured to the door, you bring life to the soil. And you spared me from the law of the rejected. You are a very poor hermit, mate Jake. Jake paused, the knife hovering over the small carcass. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the flicker of a smile in her amber eyes. Within 2 weeks, the first sprouts began to poke through the gray crust, sturdy, pale blue shoots of Terran hybrid wheat and local tubers. To the local wildlife, these tiny green sprigs were like beacons of sugar in a desert of salt. Jake woke up on the 14th morning to find Kaelia missing from her blanket again. He stepped out onto the porch, expecting to see her wandering the ridge. Instead, he found a grisly, yet oddly organized, pile of carcasses stacked neatly at the edge of the tilled earth. There were 6 skittervines, nasty, multi-legged rodents with teeth like industrial shears, and a bloated, lizard-like creature that Jake knew could strip a field in an hour. Kaelia was perched on the roof of his equipment shed, her fur silvered by the early morning mist. She didn't look tired, she looked electrified. They come in the dark, Jake, she called down, leaping from the roof with a silent thud. They thought your conversations with the dirt had produced a gift for them. They were mistaken. Jake walked over to the pile, nudging a skittervine with his boot. You stayed up all night doing this. It is a hunt where the prey comes to me, she said, her tail swishing with pride. It is the most efficient sport I have ever known. You provide the lure, I provide the end. This is how a pack functions. Yes. Jake looked at the sprouts, then back at the security detail standing before him. For the first time in a decade, he felt the weight of the farm shift. He wasn't doing this alone. Yeah, Jake said, a genuine smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's exactly how a pack functions. But we need to work on the pile situation. Maybe keep the bodies a bit further from the front door. As you wish, mate Jake. But the skittervine meat is sweet. He looked at the pile. To think we are going to have to smoke them. Smoke them? Sure, it preserves the meat. You use words that have no meaning for me. It allows you to store the meat for later. What a curious creature you are, she said. I'll take that as a compliment. He spent the day making a makeshift smoker from bits of old wood. Then he prepared the bodies and while they were smoking, cleared out the tool shed to hang on the meat when it was finished. All of the time, Kaelia hovered around sniffing the air suspiciously. During the day, while Jake was focused on the irrigation pipes, wrestling with the stubborn, rusted valves, Kaelia would go perfectly still. The wind is changing, she would mutter. The sand dwellers are moving north. We have 3 hours before the grit hits. Because of her, Jake didn't get caught in a flash cyclone that would have shredded his lungs. Because of him, Kaelia began to understand the concept of tomorrow. She no longer ate until she was gorged. She learned that the small, weak human had a magical box, the fridge, and a way of preserving life and food that defied the brutal immediacy of the Wolfgar way. She had tried the smoked meat and laughed, it is strange, but nice. However, I prefer raw meat. But I would have it again. The crops were growing. They were now 3 feet high. One morning, Jake came out after breakfast to find an enormous pile of carcasses near the smoker. You've been busy, Kaelia. Kaelia stood up amongst the crops, smiling. Not just me, mate Jake. The hunt is so large that I allowed the pups to join in. I made a deal. For every 2 they catch, they keep 1 and give the other as tribute to 2 punches. 2 punches. Yes. Your name amongst the pack. He shook his head. Well, I've had woes names. Then he looked at the pile. Well, you are quite the businesswoman. Is that one of them, compliments? Yeah, I suppose it is. She smiled and vanished back into crops. I had better build a bigger smoker. He paused and shed. After 2 more extensions, the storeroom was bigger than the house. He had changed the deal. Now they only paid 1 out of 3 as tribute, otherwise they would be buried in smoked meat. One day, they are in the fields together as Jake tended the land. Suddenly, Kaelia became alert and stood up straight. The elders are coming. Jake stopped and turned. Sure enough, there were 6 elderly Wolfgar making their way directly towards them. They stopped and bowed. Jake and Kaelia did likewise. Jake waited for the elders to speak as was considered proper under the law. One spoke. Greetings, 2 punches. Greetings, elders. I am honored by your precision. To what do I owe the pleasure? The elder looked at the land and said, "WW thought we had tricked you, 2 punches. When you came to see us to purchase this land, we took your money gladly because this land was barren and so of no value to us. We expected to feast on your dead body in a couple of months. Instead, the land has opened to you and produced abundant plants. And the abundant plants have produced abundant hunts. And our stomachs are full. So, it would appear that you tricked us, and yet we are better off because of it. Your pack members keep my fields clear of pests. It is a fair trade. Fair indeed. If you wish, I can teach you how to farm to add even more food. No thank you. We live for the hunt. It is who we are. Keeping growing food as bait, 2 punches, and we will both have what we want. Fair enough. However, if you wish, you can teach us how to smoke food. I have tasted it. It is strange but nice, although you cannot beat the raw meat of a fresh kill. I understand. I can do it.